in Tristram Hunt that the Union has had its day. But first, here's how some of his characters addressed their national identity in the film of his book, Trainspotting. With us now is Irvine Welsh, and with us also Tristram Hunt. Now, you surprised to find yourself a nationalist?
Yeah, I don't really see myself as a nationalist. I see it much more of the Union kind of being in a kind of secular decline. I mean, I see it, the Union was very much conceived as to facilitate British imperial expansion, British industrial expansion, sustained by a kind of a welfare state and the esprit de corps of 2 world wars, and all these things no longer exist. They've gone. So I just don't actually see what is kind of driving the Union, what's holding it together.
All right, what is driving the Union now?
Well, I think that's a very compelling point, and what was so interesting about the Trainspotting piece there was to suggest that the Scottish had been colonised, but the Scottish were themselves colonisers as part of the imperial project. And when we look back at the creation of Britishness, whether it's Protestantism, whether it's imperialism, many of those driving impulses, or welfarism in the 20th century, have frayed. But just because that sort of construction of it is not there, it would be wrong to suggest that the attributes of nationhood have somehow altogether lost. And I personally very strongly believe that Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland gains more from the cohesive whole than it would do if it split up into ethnic sensibilities of nationhood.
I don't think that cohesive whole, though, is kind of that sense of Britishness. I don't think it's served by a kind of political union anymore, though. I think that that's the thing that's kind of I think people feel in Scotland now that it's not so much Britishness that they're against, it's the concept of the UK and the actual union. I think that the two political cultures have become very divergent. I mean,
and he's right there, they have become very different.
Yeah,
they have, but I think that's the strength almost of the settlement at the moment, that you can have those elements of devolution within the architecture of the UK. And I think what works at the moment is, contrary to what you think, actually the political settlement. I think the cultural settlement has fallen away, and that's why Gordon Brown, for all his determination to build British values and a sense of Britishness, was actually going against the cultural currents of feelings of Englishness.
Well, why should people in England not be allowed to express their Englishness from fear of offending Scots and Welsh, or from fear of being put in this position, which they are put in by the Union, of oppressing Scots and Welsh by not allowing them into this?
Do you ever feel you can't express your Englishness?
I don't, but I have an awful lot of constituents
I've never felt it.
who genuinely feel that their Englishness is not allowed to be expressed on the same level that Scottish identity is allowed to express.
Well,
and I think
England's a multicultural post-imperial nation, and it's trying to work out this identity, this very complex identity. Scotland is much more monoethnic, and it's a very different society that's developed in a very different political culture. And I just don't see any kind of, I just don't see any connection now. And I think that, certainly the generation, the younger generation from the Trainspotting generations, every one of them seems to be much less invested in the Union.
Supposing the Scots decide not to go for independence, though, that self-loathing that we saw in that clip from Trainspotting, that's going to get really acute, isn't it?
I think it will, and I think people realise that it's not really an option. I mean, I think if it's like when David Cameron said to the SNP, which was I think was a very craven thing to say, look, we'll give you the tax-raising powers. Just don't go now, not on my watch. He was almost saying that the game's over, and it's all about legacy with politicians. Like Tony Blair staying in office to become a longer-serving Prime Minister than Margaret Thatcher. It's the same with David Cameron. It's like he's conceded the point, and he's just saying, not on my watch, just buy me 10 years of being kind of de facto members of the Union.
I mean, I certainly think he's doing great political damage to the Union, but I think we also have to think about the strengths of Britain on a global stage, and whether it's the army, whether it's the UN, whether it's our diplomacy, all of those elements actually give much greater riches and influence to Britain as a whole.
Not in the case. I mean, you look at some of the decisions we've made in foreign policy. If you look at Afghanistan, so many people were against that war, and so I don't think you can pick these kind of things as being pluses.
Do you think most people really care about strutting the world stage?
I think people do, and I think people like the fact that Britain is a leader on the world stage, and we are good at diplomacy, and we are an influential power for a small island stuck in the North Sea, and we still have that. But that doesn't alleviate the problem of what we think about our post-imperial identity. And I think Irvine's absolutely right that we need space for English people to talk about their English identity.
I don't think they can do that within the
actively.
construct of this political union of the United Kingdom. I think that, paradoxically, I think the way to enhance Britishness is to get rid of the political union and enhance the cultural union, and even bring Ireland back into the British fold. When you have something that's not a kind of
they
political
may have a view on that, of course.
Yeah, but once you've taken this kind of imperial sting out of this kind of Britishness, and and you get back to being this kind of value-free idea of people living in these islands and sharing some kind of cultural heritage, but having the different free individual political expression, to put their own systems together and to work out their own issues.
But I think that's the strength of what we can have today, which is multiple identities. So whether you can be West Indian British, Pakistani British, whether you can be ethnic English and British, so you can have an identity there, and then a federal British identity, which gives all sorts of broader advantages, I think, to the United Kingdom.
I think people have moved on from that in Scotland. I just sense that people have rejected that model.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed.